Today, our guest is an Indonesian prominent business leader and also a lawyer, Mr. John Riady. He is the Group CEO of Lippo Karawaci and also Executive Director of Lippo Group. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you for joining me to discuss the Indonesia's G20 presidency. I have some questions about it, but before that, there are some questions also, other issues.
Sure.
I hope you don't mind. Mr. John Riady, you graduated from 3 prestigious universities in the United States, right? Georgetown, right? And the Wharton School of Business, UPenn, right? University of Pennsylvania, and Columbia University
School of Law.
School of Law, yeah, that's right. And 2 of them are Ivy Leagues, correct? Yeah. So I just want to know, at that time, as a student at that time, how did you overcome challenges being a student? And then also perhaps you want to share with us, how did you get to this point?
You know, thank you for the question. It takes me back to the good old days of college. You know, I grew up in a very interesting time in Indonesia.
Right.
And I was greatly inspired by the opening up of the country. At that time, when Suharto, then President Suharto, stepped down, we became a democracy, and I saw the whole country just open up and flourish, and that inspired me greatly in what I decided to study in college. So when I went to Georgetown, I studied political philosophy and economics, and then I did my MBA at Wharton, and then my Juris Doctor in law. And actually, I focus a lot on constitutional law issues, tata negara.
Yeah.
Which I found to be fascinating, and studying the differences between how the U.S. approached things versus how Indonesia approached things, you know, as a country. So it was a fascinating time, and in many ways, my time in the U.S. Allowed me to reflect deeper as an Indonesian.
Right.
And so, following, you know, the first time I came back to Indonesia was in 2006. At that time, I spent a lot of time in media. I was involved in a number of media publications. And that too really was an extension of that journey. You know, the insight and the perspective and what I was able to learn about this country through my involvement in media and as a journalist was fascinating. And then the second time I came back to Indonesia was in 2011. And then I started off actually teaching. I taught law part-time at a private university in Indonesia. And then shortly afterwards, the technology boom was just beginning. So at that time, I started doing very small investments in the technology space. In 2013, we did our first investment. At that time, believe it or not, if you know, I added all the different companies and startups in the whole country.
Right. What year was that?
2013.
Okay.
And the total value of all the companies put together was only $60 million US, $60 million. Now, today, fast forward 8-9 years later, that same space is $60 billion.
Right.
So this is a space that's grown 1,000 times over the last 7 to 8 years. And so...
What made it grow so significantly?
The technology revolution. You know, this is a time in Indonesia where there was the whole technology ecosystem started to flourish. So if in the country like the US, for example, let's say in Silicon Valley, we would have seen that whole space maybe develop since the 50s. And maybe they've seen probably 5 cycles over the last 7 decades. In a place like China, they've seen maybe 2 cycles. For Indonesia, this was our first. And so in some sense, the change that took the US 70 years to go through, and China maybe 30 years, in Indonesia, it was the pace and the intensity of that pace was condensed.
Correct.
And so throughout that whole experience investing and learning about the digital ecosystem, the quality of entrepreneurs in Indonesia is fascinating. So that was really sort of the first phase of my career. I learned a lot. I continue to be an investor in the Southeast Asian technology space.
Right.
And today, obviously, it's extremely dynamic and it's attracted investors from all over the world. And arguably, probably the last 5 to 7 years, probably the fastest growing technology ecosystem economy in the world is Indonesia and Southeast Asia.
Right.
So I think that will continue to be a big part of what I'll be doing and my passion going forward. And then in about 2018, 2019, I started getting involved with the more traditional parts or the more core parts of what Lippo's businesses are.
Right.
And here, we're really in the business of consumer services. Every year in Indonesia, we have the privilege of serving 40, 50, 60 million unique Indonesians. Every minute of the day, there's approximately 10,000 transactions that happen across our different operations. But I think what's most interesting is the impact that we're able to have on many of these people's lives and families.
Right.
Many of these families are what we call generation of firsts, because these are people and families that in their families, in the history of their families, will experience many moments of first in their life. The first time they travel abroad, the first time they send their kids to a university,
Right.
the first time they're able to access global quality healthcare, the first time they buy a home, open a bank account, take out a mortgage, do all these, I think, very special things. And every time they do that things, their life gets better and better and better. And so our mission really is, how can we be there at those special moments and facilitate those moments? And in doing so, we're able to hopefully play a small part in making their lives better.
Right.
So that's really what Lippo does in Indonesia, and we do that across different companies,
Right.
From real estate to healthcare to financial services to retailing and things like that. And so today I've been CEO for about 3 years. It's been a fascinating journey. Many challenges, including COVID, the last
Right.
2 years,
Right.
which brought a lot of challenges, but also I think we're all better for it. We're more focused, more innovative, more determined. So I've been very fortunate to be in Indonesia. Really one of the most fortunate, one of the most attractive and promising economies with some of the best people in the world, and the best food, and the best weather, and the best beaches, and the best diving, the best coffee, the best everything.
You dive also?
I dive.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is Indonesia.
So you got the license, yeah?
I do have a license. I got my license in 1999.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Indonesia has some of the most amazing diving spots in the world.
Yeah. Which part that you've been to?
So I've dived in a number of places, but obviously Labuan Bajo,
Right.
beautiful. Raja Ampat, also beautiful. And it's extremely beautiful for both the fish and the aquamarine, but also for the corals. And in Indonesia, because we're comprised of so many different islands, as we all know, and the water or the flow goes from the south, from Australia up through
Right.
Papua all the way up to Sumatra. That whole current, because there's so much current, there's all these small planktons and everything, and so it attracts the bigger fish, and then the bigger fish attracts the bigger fish, and so that's why we are probably we've got amongst the richest sort of biodiversity. Okay. It's a real treasure, and people from all around the world. I meet random people when I travel, and they tell me few people have been to Indonesia for business, but if I ask a lot of people, have you been to Indonesia? If they say yes, it's typically because they go diving or they go surfing.
Okay.
So these are two things that globally, Indonesia is the best in, amongst other things that I think we do a good job. But surfing and diving are two things that I think Indonesia is world class and unbeatable.
Sir, since I'm speaking with the CEO here, so perhaps you have some tips on making better decisions when faced with unforeseen situations, such as the pandemic. You mentioned earlier about how Lippo cope with the challenges.
Yeah. It's a good question, and I think it's a timely one because COVID has reminded us that the world is always full of change, volatility, and unexpected things.
Correct.
And that's been true ever since. But I think today, even more so. The intensity and change in consumer behavior, in technology, in geopolitics, in public health issues like coronavirus, which then affects the economy, politics, travel. I mean, there's all these things are interconnected. So we're living in an extremely fast-changing, interconnected world. And so I think, one of my biggest takeaways as a leader and as CEO is, number one is people. I've been very fortunate to have, amazing people, leaders who are very passionate, and I rely on them. I think it's impossible for us to know everything that's going on and to make the right decision. So I think the power of having a strong team and working with people who together we can work with and find out. And then number two is be agile.
Be agile, yeah.
Sort of agility, I think, is key. Today, it's hard to plan even for a year, frankly. So, let alone 2, 3, 5 years.
Correct.
So, sure, we should always have, your North Star, what's your vision, what's your 10-year vision, 5-year vision. But in the meantime, I think every quarter, every year, every 2 years, continue to fine-tune your thinking and one's approach.
Right.
And, look at problems and changes as opportunities. So that's at least how we've tried to challenge ourselves.
Right.
In decision making.
Yeah, I like the point number one, people. Yeah?
People.
If you take a good care of your employee, your people, then they will take a good care of the company, right? Yeah.
And I try to always hire people who know more about things than I do, who are smarter, more experienced.
Right.
And I think that's the joy that comes out of. Of working and doing business.
Right. Okay. Sir, you were named a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader in 2018. Yeah. So, what's your vision for the future of Indonesia? Of course, in the sector, in the economic and business sector.
Sure. In 1998.
Yeah.
After the fall of Suharto, and we were just in the beginning stages of our reformation, few people believe that Indonesia can survive as one country. So if you read The Economist, the New York Times at the time, the words Indonesia and Balkanization appeared next to each other.
Right.
Because they thought that a country as large as Indonesia, with so many islands, so geographically dispersed, so many different cultures and histories and languages, and there could not be one strong enough identity to keep us as one country. But here we are, 22 years later. The issue of the unity of our country is not even in question. We even forget that in 1998 people questioned the survival of our country. But more than that, if you take a look at the role of the military, at that time, the military played a huge role in the economy.
Correct.
They had permanent seats in the parliament, et cetera, et cetera. Today, I think the military is under civilian rule and really doing what it should be doing very well. And then on the issue of sort of extremism, which is another big issue in today's world.
Right.
Indonesia, people thought we were the largest country, et cetera. People questioned whether democracy and Islam can coexist.
Right.
But Indonesia has shown that we can be the largest Muslim population in the world, and a very pious one for that matter. And yet that's not inconsistent with democracy and progress and economic growth.
Correct. Yeah.
And so I talk about the issue of identity, the role of the military, and extremism. Because if you take a look at all the other countries trying to go through the same journey that we went through, whether it's Myanmar, all the Middle Eastern countries, Arab Spring countries,
Right.
you forgot about that already, Thailand, etc. Typically, you know, there's some revolution, some transformation, and then along the way, either of these three things sort of cause democracy to go away. Look at Thailand, look at Myanmar. Think of the Middle East and all the Arab Spring countries that people have forgotten about today.
Yeah.
All these countries attempted to go through a process of democratization, and somewhere down the road, either extremism caused that to fall apart, or the military, for whatever reason, right or wrong, came in and said, "I'm the caretaker of democracy," but in doing so, it reversed the
Right.
democratic journey that it's gone through, or the country just split apart because it was just because of extremism or other issues.
Correct.
So this is very unique about Indonesia. We are truly one of the few countries, large countries, diverse countries, that's been able to overcome all these issues. So I wouldn't say we're a model, because I think every country is very different, but I think we should at least be an inspiration that this journey can be done. So that is, I think, what we've achieved thus far, and today we're one of the fastest growing economies, one of the most stable economies. So the question that you pose is, what's next? I think for Indonesia, the what's next, the next big existential challenge for us is, how do we overcome the middle income trap? How do we get through this middle income trap? Now our per capita GDP is at about just over $3,000 per capita. So, you know, to get to middle income, by the way, the lower end of middle income is 8,000. So before we get there, we're still going to do 2.5x. That's how much growth there is in Indonesia. But I think for Indonesia, how do we get to hopefully one day 15,000, 20,000 per capita income?
Right.
That is, I think, for our generation, our challenge. Or in other words, you know, people often ask, what's the middle income trap? It's really, how do we ensure that we don't become old before we become rich? So a lot of countries, you know, you become old before you become rich, and that's really the middle income trap. Thankfully for us, we're a very young demographic, median age, I think, 30 years old, etc. We've got a lot going on. And so what that means is, we have about the next 10 to 20 years. This is really the critical time. We've got to become rich as a country,
Right.
before we become old as a country.
Yeah, I like that.
Right? And so how do we do that? We have to increase productivity. How do we become more productivity, become a more value-added economy? This is the challenge, I think.
In which sectors, yeah?
Well, to do that, I think you got a number of engines. I think number one, human capital and education. Number two, healthcare.
Right.
Number three is, I think, about the whole idea about inclusive growth. So it's not enough that we grow. It's enough that, you know, it's important that the growth is distributed enough. It's inclusive enough. So this is obviously a big challenge for Indonesia. But if you ask me sort of what's my vision, I don't know if I have a vision, but I hope that in my lifetime I can contribute
Right.
to what I think is sort of, you know, our generation's biggest challenge for Indonesia. So innovation, human capital, this whole idea around inclusive growth, which I think has a lot to do with healthcare.
Right.
And in many ways, why I'm so excited about the businesses that we're in is because these businesses, I think, in some way or form, contribute to those development goals. Right, and we're happy to chat about that later. But as far as going back to your question, what's my vision, my hope for Indonesia? I think it's that. I hope that by the time my kids grow up and they've got kids, as a country, we would have overcome this challenge of ours. We would be an advanced country with an advanced nation, sort of per capita income, highly innovative, highly efficient, but also most importantly, equitable growth, inclusive growth, and sustainable growth.
Yeah. To achieve that, are we on the right track now?
I think we are.
Okay.
I think we are, and especially the last, 5-7 years during the presidency of Pak Jokowi, the amount of infrastructure that the president has put in place, I think, is fascinating and really a game changer. Because through infrastructure and through human capital development, those are really, I think, the two levers: hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure.
Right.
Right. These are the two sort of, I think, biggest contributors to growth and equality.
Okay, awesome. Moving on to another topic, and this is about the G20 related issues. Indonesia commits to reducing carbon emission by 29% 8 years from now, by 2030, and by 41% with the international cooperation. So my question is that from the business community perspective, what is your view on this target? Is it feasible? And how should the industry sector implement the development of the green energy in Indonesia?
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts on that. I think, first of all, Indonesia's chairmanship of the G20 is extremely significant.
Right.
I think we're the first Southeast Asian country to chair the G20.
Right.
And so we have a very important role to play in a very important time in sort of global history. So I think the timing is spectacular. We've got challenges across innovation, across sustainable energy, across public health, global health issues as a result of COVID. So there's a lot going on. On the issue that you bring up around energy transition. This is very important.
Yeah.
In the last couple of years, because of COVID, our attention, the world's attention, rightfully so, have shifted a little bit to some of the more urgent issues around COVID. But we shouldn't forget, this whole existential crisis around climate change or climate crisis. And so I think we all have to be extremely deliberate about setting a target and taking steps to achieve that target. And so there's no single person, single entity, single government that can solve this.
Right.
Every country, every company, every individual in our household, so we all have to take small steps to contribute to making this world a more sustainable planet.
Right.
Right. So certainly in our businesses, like I mentioned, we serve 40 million unique Indonesians. We're present in all, across all the different provinces of Indonesia. Certainly, we have a big role to play, and we have our sort of ESG targets. We have a head of sustainability, and so we've got a roadmap to hopefully make our small dent towards this progress. The only thing I'd add on this point is, look, there are times when there's a trade-off between this energy transition and economic growth. And so I think for a country like Indonesia, given where it is in our stage of development, we've got to take a practical approach. Sure, we want to be sustainable, we want to transition, but there's got to be the right balance between that and actual economic growth. Because the reality is for Indonesia, we have to achieve a certain economic growth target to create enough jobs, to move the economy. And so I think these two objectives have to go hand in hand. Energy transition cannot be seen in a vacuum.
Right.
It's got to be taken in the context of each country's economic development. And that's why I would even, what I'm saying is controversial, somewhat controversial, but I think in practicality it's not. Because even in Europe, which recently or in the past has been the strongest proponent of energy transition, clean energy, etc.
Right.
Today, as a result of some of the geopolitical changes and energy shortage as a result of Russia and Ukraine, they're going back to buy coal.
Correct. Yep.
So it shows that actually it's a practical approach to progress. And so I think Indonesia has to do the same. We've got to balance our different considerations, our different social, economic, political objectives, and make progress within that context.
Yeah. And you said that everyone has to contribute to achieve this, and maybe you have examples what have been done or will be done by your company in this area?
Yeah, so in a number of our assets, we're installing solar panels to be able to reduce energy consumption. In a number of our buildings that are older, we're retrofitting the MEP, the mechanical engineering, plumbing, sort of lighting, all that, so that we're more efficient energy-wise. And by the way, I think that's also good business sense, because when you do that, your operating costs also goes down, right? So we're doing that. In many of our townships today, we manage the entire water systems. So we take water, we clean it, we pipe it to all the homes within our developments.
Okay.
Then we recollect, the wastewater. We recycle that again, and then we give it out again. So all these things: water, electricity, energy consumption, amongst other things, are things that we're focusing on.
Where is it? In Java province or in other provinces also?
In Tangerang, for example, in Karawaci, in Cikarang, in Makassar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So Sulawesi, Java,
exactly, exactly. And we hope to roll it out across all the different developments as well.
Okay, good, very nice. Okay, the business community of the G20, or also known as B20, will present its recommendations to the leaders, right? And what are among other issues that the business community will emphasize in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and perhaps the supply disruption and also the increase in global food prices?
So under the leadership of Kadin,
Indonesian Chamber of Commerce,
that's right, the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And the chairman, Bapak Arsyad Rashid, the business community is very excited about Indonesia's sharing of the G20, and then the business community's contribution or input from the B20. And really there are three areas. It's in the area of renewable energy, innovation, and then health.
Right.
And there's a lot of different streams going on, a lot of great feedback. The one that I'd like to highlight, and that's I guess most relevant to some of the things that I do, is in the area of public health. COVID over the last couple of years has shown the deficiency and the problems of many public healthcare systems.
Right.
COVID has destroyed about $10 trillion of value from the world's economy.
Right.
So the impact of all this is real. And so I think one of the biggest agenda for G20 and B20 in the area of public health is how do we ensure that we've got more robust and more equitable public healthcare systems between countries and also within economies, within countries, so that the world is more ready to face these different types of health crises. Hopefully they won't happen again, but if they do, that the world will be much more ready to face those challenges.
Right, because we didn't have any experiences in this COVID-19 pandemic, right?
You're right, we didn't. I mean, a number of countries did, countries that faced SARS.
Right.
Right, and so countries like Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, they were a little bit more prepared than we were. They had protocols in place. But for most other countries, this is our first time.
Right.
And so we saw that actually we don't have enough healthcare. Not enough doctors, not enough nurses, not enough equipment, not enough medicine, not enough vaccine, no capacity to create vaccines.
Right.
And so, for healthcare in Indonesia, a significant amount of investment is required. So that I hope through this whole B20 process we can make meaningful progress towards that.
Right. Okay. Are you what is it? Kadin asked you to do something on this.
Yeah, we've had a number of discussions, and we're very supportive of what they're doing. I think they've got their agenda very well prepared, and Obviously, working in conjunction with our Ministry of Health,
Right.
Pak Budi Sadikin, and he's got an amazing vision for healthcare in Indonesia. And so we're very excited to be a part of it and to be contributing towards this program.
Okay, awesome. Okay, sir, what do you hope to see in the economic and business sector, as well as the clean energy transition program during Indonesia chairmanship of the G20?
So we live in a very divided world today. A lot of people have even thrown around the word deglobalization, that the world is going through deglobalization. And therefore, I think the role of the G20 is even more critical, because I think the G20 was set up with the objective of improving global coordination.
Right.
20 of the world's largest economies come together, and hopefully they can at least agree to some things to move things forward in a world that's extremely fragmented today. So my hope is, and I think we're seeing this already, Indonesia, the Indonesia leadership of the G20 is able to bring all the different players together. A couple of weeks ago, President Jokowi visited Ukraine and Russia. And so the steps that he's done towards that, initially there was a lot of pressure for Indonesia to not invite Russia to the G20, which is strange, by the way, because they are already members.
Right.
And if you take a poll, based on population or whatever, I think the world will come pretty much, 50-50 or maybe even more towards, not excluding Russia. But nevertheless, there was a lot of pressure on, whether we should invite Russia, whether we should do certain things. But look, I think Indonesia, in its own quiet way, collaborative, peaceful, consensus building, have gotten everyone to come together.
Right.
And so I think that's Indonesia's strength. We're a big country, we're a proud nation, but we lead in a different way. And I think Indonesia has a role to play in our current global context. So I hope that Indonesia can play that leadership role to bring the world together, to be more collaborative and to be able to solve some of the most pressing issues of today's world.
Right. Okay. Before I close this, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts. I think to those of you who are watching, who are not in Indonesia or haven't been to Indonesia, please come visit, whether it's for business or economic reasons or just leisure.
Right.
There's so much to do. Indonesia has so much to offer. It's a beautiful country, and with a lot of wonderful people and loving people, and hopefully Indonesia can during my lifetime can become a better and better place and contribute to a better and better world.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Mr. John Riady. I'm honored to have the opportunity to speak with you, and I wish you all the best and have a nice day.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. My pleasure.